Good evening, everybody. This is Dr. Grace Telesco from the Fischler College of Education School of Criminal Justice, full-time faculty member there in the School of Criminal Justice. I'm joined by my good friend and colleague, Mr. Ed Dentzel, who is the Unfound host, the host of Unfound, the podcast. For those of you who have been kind of following us all along, you know that we've had Ed on. We've been really, really blessed to have Ed be our guest each month, and we cover a different case of a missing person. And I'm gonna let him talk a little bit about the work that he does first, just really briefly for those who are first viewers of this. And we'll give you an opportunity at the end also, Ed, to tell our viewers how they can tune into your ongoing programming. One of the greatest things about this guy, everybody, for those of you who don't know him, he's down to earth, he's comprehensive, he's concise, he really knows his stuff. He doesn't bring any bias in whatsoever. There's no spin. It's just the facts, just the facts. And what he does in his work is that he gives voice to those who are literally unfound, the missing, who continue to be missing. And those families continue to have questions, especially the questions that will be criminal justice related. And we'll get to, what case we're going to be looking at tonight. I'm going to let Ed describe the case to us. He usually gives us a nice summary in the beginning, and we will have time at the end for some question and answer and comments and ideas. Another thing that Ed doesn't do is he doesn't really provide a theory. He lets us provide the theory. He lets the viewers ask the right questions to come up with, well, what about this and what about that, and why not this, and why didn't the police, investigate this, or follow that lead, or interview that witness, or whatever it might be. So it's really wonderful to have you, Ed. I'm so happy. I know we had a miss last month, but I'm glad we're back on track.
Yeah.
And please take it away. Tell us a little bit about you, a little bit about the work, a little bit about your podcast program, and then let's dive right in to the case tonight.
Okay, Dr. Telesco, it's good seeing you again. I know that we missed June, but I have to admit the time flew by so fast. I barely even realized that. It feels like we did actually do a show
I know.
a month ago, but we didn't. But we both had things going on, but it's good to be back. Unfound, believe it or not, we're coming up on our 5th anniversary, which I designate as being the first Friday of September. So that would have been September 2nd of 2016. So we're quickly coming up on the 5-year anniversary. I never could have imagined it, starting it back then, and knowing that almost 5 years later that we would have covered about 220 disappearances now, just about. I've gotten to know so many fantastic people, of course, including yourself, Dr. Telesco. Made a lot of contacts in the missing persons community over the last almost 5 years. And I continue to work with those people who have been doing this a lot longer than I have, being in the missing persons community. And I always use those people as resources. I feel very fortunate to know all of them, and they certainly help Unfound in a variety of ways. Unfound is a program, a podcast that comes out every Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern. It is what I would call an interview-based program, that every episode has an interview with somebody who I would consider to be the most knowledgeable on the disappearance that we are covering that week. Most of the time, we have family members, and the most common demographic is a mother of a missing child, an adult child. That is the most common demographic of person who is on the program. But we've, of course, had fathers, we've had brothers and sisters, we've had children who have parents who are missing. But I've also had some bloggers on, 3 in particular that come to mind so far. A couple of them have been on a multitude of times. And that's how we do the program. And as you already stated, when it comes to my theories, my opinions on disappearances, I do not air them on those episodes that come out every Friday. What I do, though, is I do write about them I do analysis of the disappearances at patreon.com/unfound podcast, where I write a blog every week that's at least 3,000 words long every week, where I do express opinions and theories, but it's behind a paywall. But once again, patreon.com/unfound podcast. If you'd like to get like a deeper a view of the disappearance, but I can assure you, when you listen to the episode, you are hearing all the facts on that disappearance that there is to offer. And I don't do theories on the program. I don't even allow the guests to do theories, because I want the people who are listening or maybe watching on YouTube or wherever to come to their own conclusions. And I found that when I express my opinions to the public, it's weird or maybe a little ironic or coincidental that everybody then starts maybe thinking like I do. And I don't want that. I want all the listeners to be very comfortable coming to their own conclusions. And should they find out what my opinion is on a particular disappearance, I want them to feel very comfortable disagreeing with me. Okay. This is not groupthink. I do not believe in groupthink. So it's a facts-based program that we've been doing almost 5 years, and the time has just flown by. And I feel so fortunate to be in this position. And I couldn't do this. Trust me, I could not do everything that we do in Unfound without my assistants, everybody who has come on board since 2016. Those people being Emily, Cherie, Carrie, Heather, Natasha, and Eric. And they all have their own functions of what they do, and I cannot thank them enough. So it's a team effort here, and I feel very fortunate, and I'm going to keep doing it. This is what I think that I'm meant to do with my life, covering missing persons cases. So I think in a nutshell, that's what Unfound is. And we only do disappearances, unsolved disappearances. We do not cover serial killers or anything like that, although those topics may come up in the live show that I do on Wednesday nights at 9 p.m. Eastern on the Unfound podcast channel. So getting into the disappearance that we're going to be talking about tonight, we are going to be going to the state of Ohio, to the city of Portsmouth, Ohio, Portsmouth. And we're going to be talking about the disappearance of Megan Lancaster. This is a disappearance that occurred on April 3rd of 2013. So it's over 8 years old. Megan, as you can see in those pictures there, she was 25 years old. She was a mother. And I don't know how much we've covered quite a few disappearances over the past year, you and I, Dr. Telesco, but I don't know how much we've really talked about drug addiction. I know it's popped up a few times, but this is one where that is going to be the topic again. Megan did have some issues with drugs. And as you're going to hear in this episode, it seems that she was a prostitute, whether by force or by choice. And in fact, as we will get into later in this discussion, the episode when we covered it on Unfound, it came out on May 3rd of 2019. The title of the episode was Little Black Book, and you will understand why that is here in a little bit. But as everybody knows who has watched my shows with Dr. Telesco before, what I like to do is, before going into the facts, the circumstances of the disappearance, I like to bring up some points, some learning points, things that the listeners or viewers tonight should think about as they're hearing about Megan's disappearance, and then the discussion that myself and Dr. Telesco will have afterwards. Number one, how difficult it can be to investigate a disappearance where a woman disappears and she has many men, what I would call, orbiting her, and many men interested in her for whatever reason. Makes it very difficult. Number two, how do we decide if a crime or disappearance is connected to overall corruption or not? You'll be hearing about that in this disappearance. And then number three, are good people truly good people when they allow bad people to continue doing bad things? And you'll also hear how that relates to all of this, all of the lot of the ins and outs of Megan's disappearance and what they found out about her and some other people in Portsmouth, Ohio. So to talk about Megan, like I said, she was 25 years old when she went missing, but her sister-in-law, Katie Lancaster, was on the program. She is actually married to Megan's brother. She was my guest, and she was friends with Megan for a long time, since junior high school, if not elementary school. And what she had to say about Megan is she was very outgoing. She did very well in school. She did very well in sports. She was very athletic. But then something changed. Katie kind of went one direction, and her best friend Megan went another. And Katie even states in the episode how one of those issues could have been that Katie got married very young, at just 17, to Megan's brother, and they are still married to this day. And Megan continued to be single, and she just got in with the wrong crowd. And to this day, Katie really cannot totally describe why that happened. She got into drugs. However, even though she had troubles with the law that Katie knew about, Megan did not have a criminal record. And once again, that will come up later, and it's going to give you something to think about. So once into her late teens, into her early 20s, she had told people that she had become a vacuum salesperson. However, there are a lot of doubts now, all these years later, that was the truth. And instead, or in addition to doing that, if she was doing that at all, she was working for a local defense attorney in Portsmouth, Ohio, named Mike Moran. Very well known, older guy. Even I guess, in 2013, he would have been in his 60s. So he might have been in his late 50s when Megan and he first met. If we're to believe that, we'll talk about that in a bit. A lot of things coming up. And there he is. There's a picture of him in his orange jumpsuit that kind of foreshadows where we're going to be going with this. But she was working with him, and Mike had a reputation of hiring young women at his law firm to work for him, maybe to do public service, to actually be employees, try to get them on the right path after they'd been involved in crimes. And he had gotten to know some of them, once again, because he was a defense attorney. So he would represent them. And then some of them, once they were done with their time, or maybe they got off of the charges, they would come to work for him. But over the years, and like I said, he was a Portsmouth fixture for decades, even going back to the 1970s. Not hard to imagine given his age. But he had a reputation that was quite a bit shady, but it did not seem that for a long time anybody could pin anything on him. And in fact, he was attorney in good standing. He had his law degree. He had his license to practice law in the state of Ohio, and that had never been taken away, despite all of these allegations of him being very shady. But given all of that, though, Megan continued. She was her addiction was to opioids, OxyContin, and she was also, it is believed, doing some prostitution. And Katie, in her interview with me, she even talks about she would keep in contact with Megan. Once again, Katie being married to Megan's brother. But she can remember one time that it was around Christmas, and I'm guessing it was Christmas of 2012, so just a few months before Megan went missing. The Katie just happened to be in at the local Walmart, and she just coincidentally ran into Megan, and Megan was trying on lingerie. And the reason Katie remembers it was Christmas time is because it was like Santa Claus, Santa's elf type of lingerie. And Megan herself said that she was going to a party and she was going to be dancing, I guess stripping, along with some other women for Mike Moran and other prominent men in the Portsmouth, Ohio area. That is what she told Katie at this encounter in December, once again, I believe, of 2012. Now, I want you to remember that, Megan saying that. So we then move up to into March, April of 2013. And you have to remember that she disappeared on April 3rd of 2013. And around that time, Megan revealed to her mother that she had a book, and that if anything should happen to her, that everybody in this book and she had the phone numbers, and I call it a little black book, but it was not that. It was more like a notebook, and it had a bunch of names in it. And in the episode, you will hear Katie say that there were at least 120 names there, with all men's names and their phone numbers, with dollar signs and dollar amounts next to their names. And there are the pictures right there. That's just a small sample of the overall book. You can tell, like, with the perforations there and the lines, you can tell that was some type of notebook. And she said Megan told her mother if she ever disappeared, anything ever happened to her, to start looking into people, these men, mostly men. I guess there are some women there, but mostly men in this list. So, and there are many, many. And like I said, there are certain names that are next to dollar signs in them, next to their names. And yes, Mike Moran is one of those men that is listed there. And he has a dollar amount by his name. So on the day of her actual disappearance, what we know is that Megan's mom met her at a car insurance place in Portsmouth, Ohio. And to pay, I think that her mother was going to pay for Megan's car insurance. And she might have been delinquent or something like that. They met there, and then they went their separate ways. And coincidentally, Katie was with her husband, once again, Megan's brother, and they were going one way, and Megan was in her car going the exact opposite way. And there was a man, looked to be an older man, in the car with her, and they were arguing as they were going the other direction. It does not seem that Megan noticed that Katie was in this other car going the opposite direction. And in fact, Katie said she got a very bad feeling about this. And seeing this, she actually called 911 and seeing Megan with this other man, just because she had this bad feeling. And the police seemingly did nothing. Now, you may be saying, well, who was this man in this car with Megan? To this day, nobody knows. And part of the problem is that after this occurred, how Katie remembered what the guy looked like was different from what her husband remembered. They both said they saw a man in the car with Megan, just one guy, but Katie saw one kind of guy, like a guy who was balding, you know, up here, but still had long hair back here, like long hair like mine, but balding up here. And that was not the description that Katie's husband saw. So that, of course, then makes it very, very difficult to figure out what kind of guy are they supposed to be looking for. But it was not a person they recognized. And even since that day, they do not know who this guy was. It was not Mike Moran or anybody else that Katie or her husband knew. But they called 911. Nothing was done. And they estimate that that was around 4 p.m. on April 3rd of 2013. So next, at about 7 o'clock, so 3 hours after that, Megan called her mother and said that she was over at these people. Their last names are the Dixons, Dixon, and that she was waiting for someone and that she would be home shortly. Megan's mother was watching Megan's son. And she said, don't worry about it. I'm just going to be here for a little while and then I'll be home. Now, the Dixons, shady people, as you might imagine. And it is believed that Megan was waiting there at the Dixons for the guy who would get her these opioids for her addiction. That is what is believed. So she said that she would be home shortly. She would be over there to see her son, to pick her son up, I guess within the hour. This did not happen. Megan never showed up. However, but the next day, when Megan did not show up, her mother drove over to Megan's apartment where she was living, and her car wasn't there. So she thought, well, maybe she's out somewhere. They're trying to call her. She's not answering. Katie's trying to call her. Megan's not answering. They're thinking, well, maybe her phone's dead. They at least know that she's not at home. She's somewhere with her car. Maybe she stayed at somebody else's house. But on that day, which would be April 4th, there are no reliable sightings of Megan. In fact, the last reliable sighting, to talk about that right now, is that she's calling from the Dixons, and you should know that there's no actual proof that she was there. That's just where Megan said she was. But that evening, later, even after this phone call, there is proof that Megan went to the Walmart and got money out of an ATM that night of April 3rd. So once again, to go through the timeline a little bit again, she is seen with a guy at 4:00 in her Mustang. Katie, a very reliable witness, sees her at 4:00. At about 7:00, Megan calls her mother. And then sometime after that, Megan is by herself at a local Walmart getting money. I forget if was it an ATM or something, but she went to this Walmart and got quite a bit of money. I did not write the dollar amount down, but it was quite a bit of money, into the hundreds. And that is actually the last reliable sighting of Megan. And to reiterate, she was by herself. But at that time, on April 4th, they're looking for her. They did not know that yet, that she had been seen at that Walmart. Well, on April 5th, so this is now 2 days later, maybe not quite 48 hours later, but 2 days later, a guy, his name is Shannon Woods. He at one time was Megan's drug dealer and would get her these prescription medication, I guess, without having a prescription. He shows up at Megan's mother's house. And he kind of just appeared seemingly to hear Katie. Katie was not there, but to hear her say it, he kind of appeared out of nowhere, seemingly. He walks up, knocks on the door, and said, "Is this Megan's mother's house? Are you Megan's mother?" She goes, "Yeah." And she goes, "Well, I just want you to know that I was just over at the Burger King, which is near a grocery store called Rally's that they have in Ohio. And Megan's car is there in the parking lot. And it's been sitting there since, I think, for at least a day, if not more. I just thought you want to know. And I've been trying to reach her, and, I don't know what to tell you, but I thought you should know that, but it's sitting there and it hasn't moved." So Megan's mother checks this out, and Shannon is, and it's a guy, Shannon, not a woman, Shannon, a guy, Shannon. He was exactly right. Megan's white Mustang was there, and people are still trying to call Megan at this point, and all of these calls are going directly to voicemail. So 911 is called. The police show up. The car is locked, and they can't get into it. Nobody else has a key, but they can see in the car that most of the things that she would usually be carrying with her, are in the car, like her wallet, her ID, etc. But what is still missing to this day, besides Megan, is her phone. And that money that they eventually found out that she got from the Walmart, that money is gone. That money has never been tracked down. So the money is missing, her phone's missing, Megan's missing, but other things that she would normally have on her were eventually found in the car. But the car was never processed at the time. What happened was the police didn't process it. Instead, it was towed to Megan's mother's house, and it sat there taped up so nobody could open the doors for 6 months. Nothing was done. So nobody went into it. There could have been fingerprints in there. There could have been blood evidence. There could have been evidence that maybe Megan had just been taken not long before that. Nothing was ever done until 6 months later. So there's that. And for anybody watching, I have to tell you, that is not uncommon. I could, I'm sure if I sat and thought about it for a while, I could name you at least 5 or 6 disappearances where kind of the same thing had happened, where a person goes missing, their car is found, and the investigating agency will just give the car back. Won't take it in, won't tow it in, won't do any forensics on it, won't analyze it. Very common. And in fact, probably a disappearance that everybody knows that Unfound is covered is Tom Brown's. His vehicle was given back to his family very, very quickly, just as an example. So her car was not processed until much later. Now, once the investigation began, otherwise didn't do much with the car, but in other things, the police, what they did, being that Megan had said she was at the Dixons, the police went and spoke to the Dixons. They denied that Megan was ever there on April 3rd. Completely denied. Nope, never here. I don't know what you're talking about. Now, but however, we do know that Megan was seen somewhere else after being at the Dixons. That would be the Walmart. If she was even, maybe the Dixons are telling the truth. We're just going by Megan's word. Shannon admitted that he did see Megan on April 3rd, but it was not at the Dixons. But remember, he was the one who saw her car in the parking lot of that Rally's. And you should know the distance from the Walmart where she got the money to where the car was eventually found, just a couple miles, not far. And you should also know that Shannon, as far as what Katie said in the interview back in 2019, is that Shannon was given a polygraph test twice, and seemingly he passed them both, if you put any stock in polygraphs. But we know they can be faked. They can be cheated. So once they went over to Megan's to see, if she was there. Once again, they got into her apartment, and that book that I've already talked about, it was found just sitting there on the table. So it was there. And they started going through the numbers. Of course, that's what Megan said to do. If something ever happened to her, start going through these numbers. A lot of the numbers were disconnected. The men who did pick up, many of them said they had no idea who Megan was, maybe for very obvious reasons. However, there was one guy from Wyoming who admitted knowing her. And in fact, he was the guy who sent her the money. This money that she had gotten from Walmart, they eventually found out it wasn't from an ATM or anything. He had wired her money to a Walmart, and she got that money. And this guy had an alibi. He wasn't even in the same state. Why was he sending her money? I guess you can leave that up to your imagination. But it does seem that he was one of her guys. And so there's that. And there was one other guy I have written in my notes that did admit he was a Brazilian guy who also admitted that he knew Megan when they reached him at one of these numbers. But for the most part, it was either men denying they knew her, or that the numbers were just simply disconnected, people not picking up. They did do a phone ping on her phone, and the last ping for her phone was actually right across the border into Kentucky. And maybe that may seem, Portsmouth is very close to the Ohio-Kentucky border, and it seems her phone last pinged over in Kentucky, even though her car was found in Ohio. To this day, the family does not have the phone records, so we have no idea who she might have called or texted on that evening of April 3rd of 2013. And that's something that's still weird to me, but once we get a little further into this, you'll maybe think maybe there's something going on here. So they have the ping information, but no actual listing of numbers and people or anything. So the phone was missing, still missing. Her wallet was open on the passenger seat of her car. Her ID and everything was there in the car. And the money that she got from that guy when she went to Walmart, it was gone. So we come back to this what I call a little black book, but once again, it was really a notebook. And they went through all of those numbers, many disconnected, people denying that they knew Megan. However, one of those numbers, and most of these numbers were for people in Ohio and a few in Kentucky, but mostly in Ohio. But Mike Moran, as I stated, this guy that she was seemingly working for, shady reputation, defense attorney, he was in the book, had $80 for a dance, is what it said beside his name in this book. However, when Mike was at the time, back in 2013, when he was confronted with this, he claimed that he didn't know Megan at all. Never heard of her, never encountered her, didn't know her, nothing. That's what he said. Says he didn't know her. However, Mike did represent a woman who had accused Megan of some things in years past, but he goes, I really did not know her. But the problem is that Megan's father or father-in-law or somebody in her family saw Mike pick Megan up once from her house. In addition, there was a story, this might have been going back a few years before she went missing, that there was a car wreck in which Mike was driving and he ran into the back of somebody. And so they had to pull off the side of the road, exchange information and everything. Turns out that Megan was in the car with him when this car wreck happened. And the family was able to track down the person who was all in the car wreck and says, yeah, Megan was there with Mike Moran. This is what this woman says. And in fact, there has been a TV show done on Spike TV a few years ago regarding Megan's disappearance and some other crimes in that area. And in that show, Mike Moran called Megan a snitch on that show. So there's that. But let's move on to this. Another person who was in that list went by just a letter, the letter E, capital E. And Katie and the rest of Megan's family were able to figure out that this E was actually the captain of the police department. And they called the number and he got all ticked off that they were calling him on a very private line. So Megan had a very, very private phone number to the captain of the police department in Portsmouth, Ohio. He also denied knowing Megan. His name was highlighted in blue. We're still not sure why that was. It seems that she did use some sort of color coding for certain people. His was in blue, maybe just a reminder that he was, blue police, maybe something like that, but nobody really knows. There were two other colors. Katie also talked about the color pink. But there were other high-ranking officials in Portsmouth on this list. But here we have the captain of the police department, who was one of them. And just like Mike Moran, he denies knowing Megan. And I have it written in my notes. There was also a prominent dental surgeon from that area of Portsmouth who was on this list as well. And when Katie found out who E was, that it was this guy, his name is Lynn Brewer, was on this list, she went and confronted him after Megan, weeks, months after, or I have it in my notes here. In 2016, she actually confronted him at the police department regarding Megan, and he got so ticked off at her, he arrested her. And she spent the night in jail. The charges were eventually thrown out. So this is like a little over 3 years after the disappearance. And I have to tell you, Katie is not to be messed with. She's very vigilant in trying to figure out what happened to her sister-in-law. But here the captain of the police department is being confronted with this, and he throws her in jail for a night. We also move on to this. Another man that features kind of prominently, and this is a judge from the Portsmouth area, William T. Marshall. And it is believed it's been out there that he and Mike Moran and other prominent men in Portsmouth, Ohio, were involved in prostitution, sex trafficking, pimping, etc. He's a disgraced now judge, and he's got in charge. He got in trouble for corruption and a lot of other He's had a lot of problems since Megan's disappearance in 2013. So we have to remember that when we covered the episode, it was May of 2019. But in 2015, charges were brought against Mike Moran, a prominent insurance guy besides him, others, for sex trafficking, drug trafficking. Some of them finally went to jail in 2018, but Mike Moran was not one of those. But after Unfound's coverage in 2019, then in Mike Moran in October of 2020, so not even a year ago, he was indicted for those same charges of being involved in sex trafficking, human trafficking, slavery, prostitution, etc. And he is awaiting trial. He's tried to represent himself. The state of Ohio is not going to allow him to do that. He is claiming his innocence regarding all of this, but you should understand none of these charges have anything to do with Megan's disappearance. But this just shows you the corruption that's going on in that town. And that's why one of the points is this related to Megan's disappearance or not? And you can see those pictures on the left is the judge, William Marshall, and on the right is Mike Moran in his orange jumpsuit. Orange, I guess, is the new black for Mike Moran. But Mike is denying everything. But Megan is still missing. We're doing this show on July 29th of 2021. She is still missing. But there's no proof that Megan ran into Mike or Lynn Brewer or anybody else on April 3rd or 4th. But could she have been sex trafficked? She was certainly a prostitute. She was certainly doing sex work for men in the Portsmouth, Ohio area and elsewhere. And of course, that, as I stated, when you have a woman with so many men around her, it's hard to figure out which one of them, if any of them, might be the guilty party. And then on top of it, we know that she had her own addictions, which of course can lead to disappearances as well. But, you know, some of the perceptions, some of the things you should think about probably regarding Megan's disappearance is that is this just maybe a carjacking? Maybe it has nothing to do with the corruption. She gets this money, goes back out to her car. Maybe somebody sees her getting this money, follows her out to her car, carjacks her, does something to her and dumps the car over at this rallies. It's something you have to think about because we have to remember that her phone is missing, but all her ID and the money and everything, or the ID and everything is left in the car. The money is also missing. But you could also look at it as, could she have been meeting somebody there at the rallies? Maybe that's the reason that the car was unlocked. And she thought, well, I'm going to park here. Somebody that she knew is going to park up next to her. She's going to go over to that car, maybe make some sort of business transaction of some type, and then she'd just go back in her car and leave. And something went wrong. And the question I would have, though, is why would her car be locked? If she was just going to go over to another car for a short amount of time, then why would her car be locked? And you just get out, do what you got to do, get back in yours and leave. But her car was locked when it was found. And so that is where the disappearance of Megan Lancaster stands at this time. Mike Moran, if he is involved or not, he's going to go on trial for what he allegedly did and had been going on for a long time. And then you can see why the points I stated at the beginning of this show about, you know, when you have so many men around one woman, it's maybe hard to figure out which one of those men could have harmed her, if any of them. Is the corruption in Portsmouth, Ohio, with Lynn Brewer, Mike Moran, William Marshall, and many others, if you'll look Portsmouth, Ohio corruption up, are they connected to her disappearance at all? And where have all the good people been in Portsmouth, Ohio, allowing this to continue? Because the more you read about it, there are so many articles that have been written even well before Mike Moran was charged. Are there any good people in Portsmouth, Ohio, where were the good people to try to stop this? Because it seemed like it had been going on for a very, very long time. And Megan Lancaster is still missing. So that is a summation of, I guess, a long summation of Megan Lancaster's disappearance. Once again, we covered it in May of 2019. She disappeared April 3rd of 2013. So there you go, Dr. Telesco.
Awesome. Awesome. And can you speak to who these people are?
Well, the woman on the right is a woman who claims that Mike Moran had sex trafficked her. And what I mean by that is didn't necessarily send her from one area, he was sending her what we might call on sex missions. He would find people who wanted to have sex with some of these young women who were working with him, and he would send them, even where I live in Florida, one of those states was Florida that was mentioned. He would force them to get on a plane, go to a state, and have sex with men for money. This is what this woman and several others have claimed regarding Mike Moran, but they had been saying this for a long time, and people just never took them seriously. But this is how this all got started. And this is eventually what got, I think, Mike Moran in trouble. But of course, he's saying that he's innocent of all of this. But Mike Moran, that is one of the women. I do not know her name, but that is, as you can see, it wasn't like you go to the police. There's no one to tell. Everybody's in each other's pocket. That's what she's talking about, the corruption in Portsmouth, Ohio. And so that's who that woman is.
Yeah. I mean, I think that you were going to talk to me about, or you had some questions based on my former law enforcement experience with the NYPD. I know that there was a couple of questions that you had that would be specific to law enforcement that maybe I can answer. But I will tell you that just my feeling on all of this, my takeaway, besides the fact that I always say this, these are real people. Mm-hmm. We don't mean to do this in any way. This is not entertainment. This is not recruitment efforts. This is not trying to be opportunistic about someone's disappearance, someone's possible death. These are very, very tragic, serious, very sad, and evokes a lot of grief in families and a lot of unanswered questions, which in psychology terms, we call that complicated grief, which means, and all of us have grieved the loss of someone in our lives if we're old enough. I have many. I lost my dad, and
I've lost my mother.
Sure, yeah. And you lost your mom.
Yeah.
And it's devastating when you lose someone very close to you. Now you compound that with not having an actual answer. Is this person deceased? Or is this person just missing? Is there a possibility that we could still recover them? We could still rescue them, find them, right? So many people who watched what was happening in Miami recently, and we're coming up on the 20-year anniversary of 9/11, where I was a first responder at Ground Zero. When families did not have their missing loved one found, there was an assumption that's made after a certain period of time, and the likelihood of them being found and the likelihood of them being found alive, it diminishes the longer it goes. Mm-hmm. So in Surfside, for example, I haven't been following it 100%, but I know that they just literally found the last, or identified the last victim. Yeah. Right. It's very powerful and important to families. Mm-hmm. So in all of your cases, in every single case that you look at and you investigate and you talk about, the families are experiencing what is called complicated grief. So that's number one. And I just always like to say that we're not just making up stuff here. These are real people with real grief, real tragedy. Okay. Mm-hmm. My takeaway from tonight is that we have a tendency to stigmatize two groups of people. One, prostitutes, sex workers. We label them, we stigmatize them. We have something that maybe in law enforcement is called confirmation bias, where there's a bias that happens where you say, oh, this person is on drugs. I put them in that category.
Mhm.
This person is a sex worker. They may not even say worker. They may call it something completely different. Because we know prostitution and illegal drug use, they're crimes.
Yeah.
So the police,
And they're often intertwined too. Together.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, I don't really know of too many young women that I've come across that are like, oh, I want to be a stripper when I get older. That's what I like to strive to do. Like what happens is there's these other variables, whether it's drug addiction, whether it's actual socioeconomic problem, and ways to get fast money, just like in the same way that someone in let's say an urban area, high crime area, drug infested area, that young person might find it difficult to go to college, to finish college, to get a job and make the same money that, the thug on the street is making, right? The dealer or the steerer or whoever it is. So young women might be intrigued by the money issue and say, I can make a fast buck doing this, but hardly is it income generated. Hardly. It's almost always drug involvement, addiction, what we'll do to get, that next fix. Anything's possible. Now, when we've talked about this, you and I too, situational victim precipitation and situational variables that like you've placed yourself in this position, you open yourself up to become vulnerable. And, do we blame the victim? No, we never blame the victim. However, we can look at some things that may have explained what happened. And so my biggest takeaway to end my little analysis here is that the police, perhaps the investigators in this case, they missed facts, they missed opportunities. You talked about the missing the car that was found, and leaving it there for 6 months without like dusting it for prints or anything like that. Why? There could be this labeling kind of stigma that's placed on, oh, this doesn't have as much value as, say, the little old lady from Pasadena who's missing, kind of thing.
Yeah, happens. And Megan, as you're talking about, she was high risk, dealing with a lot of men, doing things that everybody knew are illegal. And of course, as was proven when they started calling all those numbers, all those guys saying, I don't know her. Well, they certainly knew her. They certainly did know her. So you're exactly right. We're not blaming the victim, but the fact is people in certain choices that they're making make it more likely that they will have crimes committed against them.
Yes.
Or rape, murder, disappearances than other groups who are making different choices.
Exactly. And I know probably also on your mind is, what in the world does this captain have with this phone number?
Yeah.
What's the connection? What they had a familiarity. And
what was so important about it is she that was one of the few people on that list she didn't have his name written out. She had Mike Moran's name written out, and as you can see on those pictures, she has all those other names written out. His was not written out. It was just one letter, E. That was it, and it ended up being his number. So there's a reason she didn't write his number out or write his name out. There's a reason.
Right. And we know that the police are not necessarily, and I'm not saying that the captain in this case there was anything that was inappropriate. I don't know the full facts, right? So I can't make too many judgments about it. But I can tell you that no one is immune to foul play. No
Sure.
one's immune to criminal behavior. I mean, today's news, just take a look at today's news and you'll see a very high ranking um, religious official. I won't go into too much detail. You all can look at it on your own. Was just charged with sexual assault. I think the first time in history, such a high religious leader, high up in the chain, is going to be facing criminal charges. So no one's like
No.
beyond the criminal element
Right.
and criminal behavior and inappropriateness. So
Yeah, and the thing is of course it's been over 8 years since she went missing, and it very well may be that maybe she was being an informant for the police or something like that. That I guess is possible. The problem is that she's been missing for over 8 years and nobody's ever said that. Nobody's
Well,
ever
if she
come
was
to
in-
say,
right,
well, you know what? She was doing this for us. That's never been
Right.
stated. So we must have to take for granted it must have been something else, the reason she had.
yeah. I mean, you mentioned the possibility of possibly sex trafficking,
Mhm.
and sex workers are at high risk as well for
Yeah,
that.
of
Strippers,
course.
dancers, escorts, they're all vulnerable and at risk, high risk for being sex trafficked. And so again, I want people to really walk away with this thinking, um, she's a victim.
Mm-hmm.
She's
Yeah,
not,
of course
she's not a perpetrator.
Right.
Even though prostitution is illegal, uh, that's neither here nor there,
Doesn't matter.
really.
No, doesn't
She's
matter.
a victim of possibly a homicide.
Right. She is the victim. She is the one in the vulnerable position.
Right.
Not her customer. She's the one that's in the vulnerable position for sure.
Right.
Of course. I do have it. You mentioned I had some of these questions I wanted to ask you, and I know that it just come up in another email I sent you on a totally different disappearance and everything, that you'd worked in the behavioral science department at the Academy for the New York Police Department. And, your perception, if I sent you a bunch of links regarding the stories about Mike Moran going back many, many years. What is your perception? Why do things like this continue when there are good people around? You have a Mike Moran, it's kind of an open secret, that he does these things, and maybe the law hasn't got to him, but it certainly seems like people knew he was shady. We would have a lot of turnover in the district attorney's office over the amount of time that he was a defense attorney there. We would have a lot of turnover in the police department, other investigative agencies at not just the local level, the state level. How do you think, from a behavioral science standpoint, how does somebody like a Mike Moran just continue to operate? What do you think? Any insight into that?
Again, it lends. I have to say, well, like today's news. You look at today's news. You say, this is a religious man. I'm not talking about a cop now, or a captain, or an investigator, or or a defense attorney, prosecutor, judge. It doesn't matter. Talking about a religious leader, right? You say, how could that be? And how could no one have known about it? And we know that everybody knows about it. So why the cover up? What is that about?
What is it about?
Well,
exactly.
It's a
what is it
about?
about?
It's a band of brothers and sisters that's no different than any other kind of gang, where you're not going to rat on anybody else. Now, what I do find hard to believe, and we see this in politics too, it's just like, you mean to tell me that nobody's leaking this? How is that possible? That no one's leaking this information out, and that the masses don't know?
It seems to me that it certainly was leaking out, at least in Mike Moran's case. And we should also say, for the record, there's no proof that Mike Moran had anything to do with Megan Lancaster's death or disappearance. Let me restate that: disappearance. We're just taking for granted she's not with us anymore. There's no proof that it had anything to do with her disappearance. But being that he denies ever knowing her, etc., certainly looks bad. But it certainly, there were leaks. There were people who believed that he was doing these things, and it just doesn't seem that anybody did anything about them. I guess
so. It seems like there was some hints around, just like the child sexual abuse scandal, that we see happening right now in the news today. But people knew about it. There's maybe a buzz about it, and there is some information, but not enough of a lead, or not enough for it to rise to the level to take it serious. And I really do believe still, children are very vulnerable. Sex workers are vulnerable. Those who are addicted are vulnerable. The mentally ill are vulnerable. Even the elderly are vulnerable. And I say that because what society has done is they box people in, and some people have more value than others in the mind of the human.
Yeah.
And so, our police are recruited not from another planet, they're recruited from
No,
here.
they're
So
humans too. Absolutely. Yes.
so, there's this notion of bias and confirmation bias and implicit bias, and that tunnel vision that we get. We write stuff off. Oh, he was only, or he's just an addict, or he's just a prostitute, or he's, or she's just fill in the blank. And so there's two things going on. There's the stigma, and then there's, this band of brothers idea of we stick together and we protect each other, and we're not going to let that kind of information go too far. We're not going to investigate it too far.
I guess the way I look at it is, with, for example, once again, being that we're talking about a Mike Moran, that, surely people knew about it and just let it go. And it's one of those things, if you could go in a time machine and go back, 30 years or maybe 15 years and say to a junior in high school, you're going to be a police officer in Portsmouth, Ohio in 10 years. And there's going to be a defense attorney that you're going to know about that is sex trafficking women, using women, doing things. He's going to be charged with all this, and you're going to ignore it. I'm sure that guy, that 17-year-old, 16-year-old would say, I would never do that. However, then we know, though, that people do grow up to do these things. That something,
yes.
At some point, their thinking changes that, well, I have to just protect my own. Right. I have to go along with the crowd for this reason, for that reason. Right. I'm going to just stay to my business. And, is it getting jaded? What is that within human nature? Because we know that happens. A lot of people end up doing things in their adult lives, they're not necessarily doing anything illegal, but they're ignoring things that are going on that they know maybe 20 years ago, if somebody told them they were doing that, I'd never do that. But here they are 20 years later doing it.
Yeah.
So it's always a fascinating thing regarding, psychology, regarding.
Look at the Epstein case, and look at the top people that were involved there. If you ever have a chance to watch the documentary,
sure. Absolutely.
It's chilling. And the pictures of the people that we recognize and we know who are very famous, former leaders, whatever it may be, you're like, did they know that was going on? Yeah. Of course they did. Yeah. Of course they did. They had to know. Right. Yeah. So, but yet nothing was done about it. And so that's why it's so important. Your work is so important as an investigative reporter, that is like, trying to uncover and discover that which the regular crowd is not looking at, or is saying, it's that case is closed. That's a cold case. Forget it. And we're not going to reopen it, for whatever the reasons are.
Yeah. As far as, I wrote about Megan's disappearance on our Patreon blog at the time. I'm still very open to it. You could see this as some sort of carjacking. She went to get the money, and somebody saw her with the money and attacked her, and it had nothing to do with the corruption in Portsmouth, Ohio, had nothing to do with any guys on that list, had nothing to do with any of them. The problem is that we have Mike Moran denying that he knows her. We have the Dixon saying, she was never at our place. And then of all people, her drug dealer or former drug dealer is the one who lets her family know that, hey, her car is parked over in this parking lot. No, nothing suspicious about any of that. So it's easy to think that this is something crime not connected to any of that. But you look at what these people have said, how they've behaved, and you can't help but go in that direction somehow.
Exactly. Yeah, I know. And it seems like some type of a cover up, and I don't know, but
Yeah.
all of the pieces, there's a big disconnect there. So
Yeah.
definitely something doesn't
Certainly is.
compute.
Yes.
Did you have any other questions? Because if you
No,
don't,
that's pretty good. No, we covered those pretty well. No, that's really good.
so let's have David and Josh on. For those
Mhm.
viewers who we have a very light crowd tonight, by the way.
Sorry to
Um,
hear that.
maybe it's because it's summer. Maybe
Yeah,
because we missed our momentum last month. I don't
that's all right.
know. But let me bring these two on. I'm gonna stop our spotlights so that we can have them in gallery view like this. So I know you remember these two
Yeah.
very now. So much has happened
Just
since
when we thought, just when
last.
we thought they left, they're back again. Just when we thought we were out, they pull us back in, Dr.
Yeah,
Telesco.
that's right. Now these two graduated, right? So I'll introduce them to the viewers because also, if people don't come on live stream right now while we're live,
Mhm.
they can watch
And watch
this
later. Yeah.
later because you also upload it thanks to
Yeah.
your amazing technical support. You upload it to your channel. We have it
Mhm.
uploaded on our channel, and we could share it wildly, and everybody could look at it later on at their leisure.
Yeah.
But I just want to highlight these two for a minute, if I can, brag on them just
Okay.
a minute. So they graduated in May. This is David Troxel and this is Josh Enfinger. And they were working with us on so many different projects. They've been with us for every Unfound episode that we've done together.
Yeah.
Every single program that we've done. They're part of Run, Hide, Fight. I mean, these two, I can't even. If I had, I don't have sons, but if I had sons,
Uh-huh.
it would be them right
This
there
too.
because I'm
Yeah.
so proud of them. So they graduated in May with a bachelor's in criminal justice, top of their class. Have made so many great impressions throughout the school that guess what? The school hired them. So they work now for NSU, and it's just wonderful. So I'd like
Wow.
to hear from Josh and David. Just any of your thoughts on this case, anything that you'd like to add, any questions that you might have for Ed.
Absolutely. Ed, thank you so much for having us on. It's always wonderful to see you. And of course, my mentor, Dr. Telesco, which I can't say enough good things about. So let's dive right in. A few things, Ed, you already know how I am. You know how I work with your
Mhm.
cases. I like to discuss the facts and certain details, like, how I get technical with the cell phone tracking,
Yeah.
and things like that. Now, as we know, Megan Lancaster was involved in various, let's say, illegal activities.
Mm-hmm.
Um, she was around a bunch of unsavory people, countless number of men, which are very hard to track. And as you mentioned, most of these men, if not almost all of them, are going to deny even knowing her out of fear of prosecution or other,
Or their
negative.
wives and girlfriends too.
Exactly, or other negative impacts of
Yeah.
some sort.
Yes.
Especially when you start mentioning, a prominent judge, defense attorney, a prominent
Mhm.
sheriff that she had a very private phone number of,
Yeah.
and things of that nature. Now, I do have a few theories, of course, as always. One, like you'd mentioned, I'm honestly, I hate to say it, but I'm not surprised that her vehicle was not processed for 6 months. That, like you said, is unfortunately I don't want to say it's becoming the norm, but it's becoming more and more apparent that is happening in certain cases. The Dixons, of course, denying she was ever around. They're most likely, from what I'm gathering, supplying her with narcotics and other illegal, nefarious activities around that household.
Yeah.
Personally, I believe that the old drug dealer, Shannon, that you mentioned,
Yeah, he was a little younger. He was not old. He was a younger guy, but yeah,
right, the
former
old
or
drug,
maybe probably current, but at least former, if not current. Yes.
correct, right.
Yeah, around her age somewhere.
Now, in my opinion, I would say that individual most likely had additional information that he withheld from what it sounds like. He may have, in my opinion, known a little more than what he's admitting to, and decided he wanted to be a good Samaritan and give a tip, meaning, hey, her car's located over here. Which brings me to, the comments about her vehicle. In my opinion, from other cases that I've studied, other cases we've done, I don't believe that her vehicle, I don't buy the, drug deal gone bad kind of scenario. It's, in my mind, more likely that vehicle was staged. They may have kidnapped her. She may have been assaulted. I don't want to say murdered, because obviously it's an unsolved case. However, she may have been abducted and her car staged there with most of her belongings in it, so that they would not be found with her belongings.
Right.
Now, as far as a cell phone, because how I am, from what you had stated, that was last pinged somewhere in Kentucky. It is my opinion professionally that, and I don't say this lightly, but I would highly suggest that further evidence, whether it be a body or any other type of evidence, would most likely be found somewhere in Kentucky. If that was where her last phone was pinged, it sounds to me like her phone was shut off for obvious reasons, and that she was taken across state lines for whatever illegal practices, most likely against her will. Now,
how does that sound to you? How does that sound to you, Ed?
It sounds certainly viable to me. All I would say is, we don't want to get too crazy about it being in Kentucky, because once again, Portsmouth, Ohio, that
right.
It's very close. Well, she's in Ohio, it pings in Kentucky. Well, people start thinking hundreds of miles. It's not. It's somewhat very close, but still, your point is well taken. I think what sticks out to me is that if she was getting together, it's, she got this money from this guy in Wyoming. Why he sent their money, everybody can guess. But it seems to me she would be getting that money to do some sort of transaction of some type. So Absolutely. It would lead that she's getting that money to have some sort of maybe drugs transaction or something. It doesn't seem to me that she would go get that money before meeting some customer that she was going to be conducting some other type of business with, because she wouldn't want that money around because it might get stolen. You know what I mean?
Right.
Absolutely.
So, that occurs to me, but it also, once again, could open up just maybe this is just a carjacking.
Absolutely.
Maybe it has nothing to do with her business at all. Somebody saw her get that money, woman by herself, going to go attack her,
Now, Ed, I'm gonna just interrupt a second here, because I have a comment that I want to share. All right, from one of our viewers. Could it be that Mike Moran might have just been embarrassed or worried about the association, and that that's the reason that he's denying he knows her?
Yeah, that to me sounds like a stretch, given his reputation in that area for a while. He's to my knowledge, he's not married. So I don't know why he would, I can understand
because
if
he's a reputable, right? Because he's a reputable person, right? So
the thing is, though, as I stated, he had women working for him in his office who he had formerly or previously represented. Women that were felons, that he gave them jobs and things like that. But of course, now many people believe he did that because he wanted to get them in his little clique so he could force them to do things. Or, I'm going to send you right back to jail or something like that. So,
all right. Okay. Fair enough.
I agree with that.
David agrees. I
don't know.
Josh, what do you, we don't want to keep you too much longer, because you've been up all day. Both of you have been up all day working, right? So
I would say that often these victims, the abuser, as I'll call it, often use drugs and other means to control their victims, and that is, could very likely be the case.
Yeah. Josh, you want to weigh in?
It's funny. I feel like one day I'm going to have to go before David and see if I can beat him to some information. No, I mean, the whole time, listening to this too, it really reminded me of that case that I think it was like our second to last case. I remember I was even in contact with the mother because I even was very interested in the story. And the sound is very similar. And I remember how we were talking about it last time. And I mean, even I was going to mention what David said. I think for the people, I think it's crazy how they're trying to distract. I feel like that's what it was. It was a distraction. They plotted this here, even though if it might have their names or whatever on it, they're moving. So it's just like, it's one of those things where even I feel like in shows and even how you like read in certain classes and stuff, it's like they're always trying to be like one step ahead. So if they push evidence here and then they push here, it's like they're causing like another border. They're like, okay, now we have to stop here, look at all this stuff. And now they're like, even Dr. She said, now you're 2 states over. Now you're moving over to Kentucky instead. You're pushing all the evidence back another state. So it's crazy how that works. And even how David said how easy it is to control victims of that sort. And I mean, it's sad to say, but there's definitely, for me, I feel like even, especially now, since you said it's been 8 years, I kind of like to think more so on the positive side, especially the fact that with everything out nowadays with just like new IDs, fake passports, even just like changing up a look, like there's a possibility that maybe she became interested in what they were doing, and like maybe she's still affiliated with that, and like they made it seem like she was dead or missing. In reality, she's like under their nose, and it's possible that maybe that's why they're not affiliated. Maybe he's like, oh, I don't claim any part of that. Well, I agreed. If I had a big name and all of a sudden I have an investigation, that would be rough. But as well as if everyone out of mind, out of sight, she's part of the team now, and I wouldn't say no one's looking, but now it's more of a distinguished kind of look and find. It's going to be a lot more different. And, if they enjoy that lifestyle, they enjoy that lifestyle.
We can't forget something that she said to her mother. She was somewhere and she told her mother that she was going to be home soon. So this would then lead us to believe that if that's true, if she was telling the truth about that this was whatever happened wasn't something that she thought was going to take her a long time to do, whatever it was. And something went wrong. She had a plan to meet somebody and something went wrong.
Yeah.
So being that she told her mother, and to my knowledge, I just don't think it came up in the interview. I just don't remember if she'd ever done that before where she stood her mother up. She said she was going to be home that night, but she didn't get home like the next day. I don't know anything about that. But if we were to hear that this is the first time that ever happened, it was the time that she disappeared, it would certainly mean that she did have full intentions of coming home. She was going to meet somebody. She thought it was just going to take a couple minutes to do whatever they were going to do. And in doing that, something happened. Something went wrong.
Yeah. I want to just say thank you, Josh and David, again. They're not getting paid to be here. They're here because they just love it. They love us. They love us. We love them. So we'll see you. Actually, Ed, tomorrow, Josh and David and I are going to be heading up to Brevard to see the sheriff, Wayne Ivey. We're going to be doing some work with him and doing a big CJ presentation. So I'm going to let them both get going so that they could get some beauty rest for tomorrow, because we leave early in the morning. And I need Josh to be 100% because he's driving. I do want to say that. So thank you again, David. I'll see you in the morning.
Absolutely.
Thanks for being on. I do want to say this, Ed, as we close, and that is that just like in psychology and in social work, we talk about a continuum of care. So like you have your primary physician, right? And then you've got your cardiologist, and you've got your gastro guy, and you got all these, and a lot of times they operate again in these kind of categories and with tunnel vision and pigeonholed. And I think the same thing happens in policing. So what I want to say is this: people like Sheriff Wayne Ivey, for example, who I happen to know, he's been on our YouTube programming before. He's kind of a continuum of care guy. He's looking at the whole picture. You have a unique lens with all of the cases because you've got all of the witnesses that come to you that you're able to talk to. You have the family that's so into it, and the families know more about the case than
Mhm.
law enforcement might know. So
Good.
what I
Yeah.
think is something that because we'd like to end maybe on an upbeat, is that police chiefs and executives and leaders of law enforcement have a great opportunity to look at these kinds of cases in the same way, holistically, and to get the families on board as an ally, to get the
Mhm.
families involved,
Yeah.
and any other potential third party witness or help assist in filling in some of the blanks. And I think that what happens is there's a tendency to, law enforcement takes the report, they listen to the family, they might have a couple of follow-up meetings with them, but then that's it.
That's
And
it.
then, am I right? And that's been
You're certainly right.
experience.
You're
So-
certainly
so
right.
then what happens is the family starts chasing law enforcement. Did you find this? Or
Mhm.
here, I found this and I want to give it to you. But then there's this sort of like, lay back attitude with, let us do our job.
Yeah.
The tunnel vision, the confirmation bias, all of that stuff comes into play.
Yeah.
I would urge our police executives and our police leaders across the country, and I think that they are. I think that they're starting to, but it's a trickle down approach. So it starts at the top. The leader, the police leader, the police executive has the vision, and then that goes down to the patrol officer, down to the investigator. And I want to urge them to bring the family in as part of the team in the investigation.
It's interesting you bring that up, because I would not say, I mean, there are certainly guests who've been on the program that have had what I would call an adversarial relationship with the investigating agency and some of these disappearances. And then there are certainly some who it seems like they've formed a good team with the investigating agencies. Whereas I think most of my guests, 90% of them, are kind of in that middle area where it's more like that uncle that you're going to have to see at a family reunion like once a year, and you just get along with them because you have to get along with them. You don't hate them, but you don't like them either, but you have to see them because that's the right thing to do. You talk, you play nice, you get along, and that's about it.
So who's the uncle? Who's the
uncle? The
uncle
would be law enforcement.
Okay,
because of them, not doing, behaving the right way, doing the right things, saying the right things, that uncle that just, it's kind of awkward and, and embarrassing. And, just, that's, I think, how families sometimes feel about the investigating agencies, that they just have to tolerate
But
them.
would you agree that if they brought them, if there was much more of a open communication, cooperation, collaboration,
absolutely,
you're part of the team, we're here to solve this case together, kind of thing, that might, I base this on my 9/11 experience. When I would meet with a family member and their person hadn't been found, no remains, nothing, we would sit together. I didn't have many answers.
Yeah.
Because we didn't. But one of the things that I would say is, we're in this together. We're going to get through this together. This is going to be very difficult, but we're in it together. We're a team.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with that.
Even if the outcome isn't a good outcome, that's important. That's important. But what's much more important is that psychological deleterious trauma that we were talking about that happens, this complicated grief that happens to families.
Yeah.
And so the family wants to know that they're empowered to be a part of the investigation.
Yeah.
That's what
I think if I could speak for the families in general, here's what I would say: that what exasperates them is a few things put together. Number one, how many different investigators can be on a disappearance over the course of so many years. You know, if you have a disappearance that's 10 years old, it's not unusual to have over that 10 years, 5 or 6 different people responsible for it. And every time a new police officer becomes in charge of it, they're starting from square one. They might not have even heard about the disappearance before until the file, they start going through it. That is very exasperating to families. The other thing is exasperating, even more so, is how investigators, detectives will say, well, you got to be patient. We're working on this. You got to be patient. We're doing this. And then the family goes along with it. Okay, well, we'll do whatever, we'll let you do your job. And then it's like 15 years later, that police officer has retired. He and his family are going to Hawaii every year. And the case is still unsolved, even though this family listened to this person and said, we'll listen to you because that's the best way it's going to get solved. The person and the family's still holding the ball, and the police officer that they listened to, that disappearance now after he is retired is the furthest thing in his mind. That is what really gets families. And I think that's what, even then, with the current then investigator, jades them even more, because they're hearing the same things from the current one that they heard 20 years ago. And they start thinking, well, the same thing's going to happen over again. This guy's really not really trying to help us. Yes, he says he is. And I'm not saying he's blowing us off, but
right.
We're listening to him, but this isn't moving any further.
I hear you.
We're not making any progress.
Yes. So I hope that as people watch this, if they watch this program and they watch your program ongoing weekly or as monthly, that those of our students in the bachelor's and the master's and the PhD program in criminal justice at Fischler College of Education at NSU will glean from this opportunities for change.
Yeah.
Opportunities to be able to collaborate more with the families, to be able to follow through more with the families in some way, whatever it might be. And I think that communication is key. You may not get to hear what you want to hear, but at least the communication is open, and then it needs to continue to happen. So, I have no shame in my game, shameless plug for our programs. I do believe that we still have room for the PhD program that begins in the fall. And of course, the bachelor's and our master's. And you see the kind of product that we put out in terms of who we turn out at the bachelor's level. And by the way, David and Josh are going to be joining the master's program in criminal justice shortly. I think this term they're taking off, but then they're going to be doing it next semester. So the leaders and shakers, the new generation of criminal justice professionals is what we're turning out here. And Ed, I know that you're going to be speaking at a college.
Yeah, we are going to mention the college. I'm keeping the college a secret right now, but yes, it'll be in Louisiana in October. Yes.
Well, we're jealous now, so we have.
Well, I want to come
Ed
down to
Dentzel.
Nova Southeastern sometime and
It's
speak
in live person envy right now.
Absolutely.
So,
yes.
Well, I'm teaching Introduction to Criminal Justice in the fall in person. And I know you're a big golfer, big disc golfer.
We could get together on a date. I'll be there. I'll put the presentation together. We'll do a little PowerPoint. I can make it happen.
I'd love it. You'll be a guest in my Intro to CJ class.
Sure.
I'm thinking probably when we do investigations might be a good time and a good topic for that. So great. Ed, why don't you finish up with telling us a little bit of for the viewers and for those who are going to watch the recording later on, how they can find you.
We are everywhere. The Facebook discussion group, the Facebook page. We have the website, theunfoundpodcast.com. Our Unfound podcast channel right here on YouTube, which has so many videos on it. We are on Instagram, just Unfound Podcast. We're on Twitter, Unfound Podcast. And I do the live show on our YouTube channel every Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern. Want to remind you, patreon.com/unfound podcast or paypal.me/unfound podcast. And this Friday, we cover a disappearance from Ohio, from Springfield, Ohio. Amanda Ward Romine, a woman who disappeared in Ohio. That is this coming Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern. It will be uploaded.
That's great. And so I want to say thank you to you, Ed, for our friendship, our affiliation, our collaboration together on these programs. I want to say thank you to my dean, Kimberly Durham, who is the dean of the Fishler College of Education School of Criminal Justice, who was actually viewing us tonight, and Dr. Tammy Kushner, Dr. Marcelo Castro. These are the leaders and the executives that run our school, and you could see that again, as we talk about leadership, how leadership plays such an amazing, important role in the product. And so it's really their support and their leadership that is a result of this programming. So thank you again. And
good to see you again.
We have to make a date for next month.
August, yes.
All right, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Good night.
Good night.